Welcome to the Wizard's Respite Sanctorum, a place to discuss the world of tabletop role-playing games. I'm Ash from the Wizard's Respite, and as always, I'm here with Zachariah of Old Man Gaming. Today, Zach has brought us a new game to deep dive into. Zach, what are we looking at? What do we got today?
We are looking at Four Into Darkness. I'm sorry, Four Against Darkness, which is a really fun game. Came to me by way of a friend of mine who just said I had to try this out. And it's one of those things that anybody who listens to the gaming side of my channel knows that I love procedural generation in video games. I also, if you listen to the TTRPG side, I'm starting to really love the procedural generation in tabletop games. And this game is like a master class in how to procedurally generate a game for yourself, personally. But yeah, I'm super excited. Super excited, Wiz. Super excited.
Yeah, I read this thing when you told me about it last week. I actually really dug it quite a bit as well. I think it has really simple, interesting mechanics that I'm definitely looking forward to exploring deeper and really getting sinking my teeth into it.
Yeah. So this one has a special place in my heart too. We kind of talked about it in our last episode, yeah, with the Hero Kids,
Yeah.
when we were kind of talking about gaming. This is, as of today, other than my own game for a few minutes, the only game that I've actually gotten Stella to play multiple sittings of with me. Stella being my 7-year-old daughter. So this just has a special place in my heart because of that. Because I've spent a couple hours at the dining room table on a Saturday morning, questing with her, and that was just really fun and exciting for her to be into something that I'm into for a change. Is nice. Is nice.
That is really cool. That's really nice. And if I remember right, you were saying one of the reasons why was because you guys could kind of be on the same side a bit.
So, okay, well, let's get into the game a little bit before we get into that, because
Okay.
the game itself, as we've said, there is no. It's technically meant to be a one-player solitaire dungeon diving pen and paper experience. Basically,
Right.
what you do is you get yourself a notebook of graph paper. You get yourself a notebook to write down notes. You make a party, which is relatively simple and easy, of 4. It's got to be exactly 4. And then you're going into a dungeon. And then basically as you go through it, you roll dice to procedurally generate what the dungeon looks like. So, like, you'll roll, and then there'll be a picture of what your roll matches up to. And then that's the room you draw out on the graph paper. And then you roll to find out what's in it. And you roll to find out who's in it. And you roll to find out what's going on inside that room. And then you decide which way you're going to go from there. And then it procedurally generates another corridor or room for you. And you move through the dungeon trying to find the boss and then escape the dungeon. So that the reason I wanted to talk about that first is that's kind of the big thing with Stella was the games that I had tried before. She didn't like it when I was the bad guy. With this, you're rolling dice to find out what's happening next, and you can very easily say, "Oh, this is what's happening next." She also doesn't really understand character creation yet. Like, she doesn't want to be somebody else. She always just wants to be Stella, and she always wants to be the characters around her to be characters she knows. So we literally, in this game, you pick. So you, like I said, you pick 4 classes. You pick 4 characters. The characters are warrior, cleric, rogue, wizard, barbarian, elf, dwarf, halfling. And you get to pick 4 of them. And then of those 4, the only character creation is like you get a trait, which is like a special power that's indicative of that character. You get like starting weaponry, and then you get starting gold that you can spend for equipment that you take with you. And so, like, we had a cleric that was our dog, Emmy. She was a elf Stella was an elf. I was a barbarian, and I cannot for the life of me remember what her mom was. I think we made her mom a warrior or something like that. I can't remember, but it was the four of us, and so it was kind of interesting because she got to basically decide what everybody was doing, like a leader, almost.
Yeah.
And I still rolled for my character, which kind of made her feel like we were attached. And then I had her rolling for the dungeon rooms and all that. She got really into that aspect of it. It was kind of like we were working through it together, even though I was kind of much more like I don't want to call it GM because the game was doing it itself, but more like a ref to it, kind of explaining it to her. But yeah, so like then what you do is you just start rolling for rooms, and then the rooms can have everything in them. They can have features, events, treasure, bad guys, the whole 9 yards. You can even get side quests in the game. Like you can randomly meet somebody who's like, I need you to find this thing and bring it back to me, and you have to find the thing within the dungeon and bring it back to them. I think this game, like I said, and it's all just done with rolling dice by yourself really quickly,
Right. Right. Yeah. That is a awesome and adorable story, by the way.
Yeah.
I can really see how that would work great, with a kid. And almost, I would imagine, almost feels a little bit like a story time. It kind of reminds me of when
Yes.
I was a kid. My dad and I would read Choose Your Own Adventure.
Yeah.
When he was teaching me how to read, basically. Sort of reminded me of that, spending time with my dad doing a similar thing.
Well, we actually started that. We started with Lone Wolf, the Lone Wolf books. I don't know if
Oh,
you know
really?
those. Yeah. Maybe something we could do on the podcast at some point. The Lone Wolf books are choose your own adventures, but they're role playing game choose your own adventures, basically, where you actually
Yeah.
do make a character. So the idea behind it would be I would read this stuff to her, and she would be making the choices and stuff. She hated it because it felt like I was the bad guy because I was reading everything that terrible that was happening to her.
Oh, gotcha.
So that's actually one of the things we started with. But yeah, this is very much like that. I love any game that you can play by yourself, and I love any game that procedurally generates itself in a seamless way, and this does. Like, you can have a full story to it. I mean, one of the cool things,
Yeah.
too, is you can even link your stuff to themselves because your characters level up if they manage to survive through the dungeons. And the dungeons are hard. They're not easy. Like, your characters can very easily die. But if they live through it, they can actually level up, and then you can take them into other dungeons. There's also, from what I understand, like additions to this game, which I haven't gotten into, where like you can have higher level stuff. And
You're right.
personally, the game seems very easy to mod, just from a standpoint of like it would be very easy to make a sci-fi version of this where you're going through a ship, or something like that.
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think this game is really cool and very easy. Well, and that was one of the cool things. I got Stella to play it 3 times, and when we would get to the end, when we get to the bad guy, she started to have input on why we were there. Like, oh, he's got a princess, so we've got to save. And then once we save the princess, what does the princess say to us? Oh, this is what the princess says. Well, why do we have to go fight this guy? Oh, this is, and that was something that was really cool. Is you got to see her creative side start to take over a little bit more.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It was very fun. It was very fun. I'm hoping one day that she wants to do it again, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm. That's a really awesome story. I hope so too for you guys. That sounds like a lot of fun. And a great way to kind of dip your toe into TTRPGs. I think
Yeah.
is we kind of discussed this a lot last on the Hero Kids. Is with your family, like
Yeah.
you learn this whole hobby from your parents and then with your friends, and it's
Right.
just kind of you're spending time with people you care about, and it's kind of one of the best parts about these games. I mean, yeah, adventure is great, but it's also being with people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've talked about it a lot on this show specifically, I think, but I go out of my way to not force my kid into the nerdy stuff I do, just because I think that that's just as bad as forcing them to play a sport or something. Like, let them figure out who they are on their own. But it's still really nice when she wants to do the nerdy stuff. You know what I mean? Like, that's really nice. Especially with, like, there's a lot of things she gets into now that I'm not into. I can't follow her down that road. And even the way she games, like, she's very into video games right now, but the way she games is so different from what I do. She'll play Roblox, which is just like, she'll play weird things where it's just like, it's just a big open city and you create a character in it and you can just go to the supermarket and pretend to be a clerk for no reason. Like, you don't get money for it or anything. Like, there's no, like, goal. It's just like you're pretending to be things. And like, for me, I'm like, okay, I can't keep doing. This feels like the biggest waste of time, not accomplishing anything. There's no end goal. So it drives me nuts. But what's funny is when I think about it, in some ways, it's a much more pure form of role playing than the stuff I do anyway, because I'm usually trying to acquire something, or accomplish a goal.
Right.
She's like, no, I'm just going to pretend to be a baby for an hour. Like, oh, okay, all right, I can't do that. And maybe you're a better role player than I am.
Yeah, that's actually, I had not heard of that game before. That's actually kind of interesting. It kind of reminds me a bit of, like, maybe playing house a bit or something.
Yeah, it's very much like that.
My kid sister, when we were growing up, played house. Mm-hmm. She had dolls and stuff like that. But I wanted to play superheroes.
Right.
And the same kind of thing. I think maybe it's a boy-girl kind of thing.
Maybe. There's definitely some things are, some things aren't. But, like, at the same time, like, there's definitely times in role-playing games where I'm in a group right now where the game master hates fighting. He hates it. I found it out the other day. He's like, it always slows everything down, and then you got to do turns, and you got to do stats. He's like, I just like role-playing. He's like, the combat has to be there for it to be fun, but, like, I just like the role-playing. And we played this game. It's a homebrew game of his own creation. It's kind of space explory. Played for, I want to say 6 hours the last session, and not a blown was thrown. Not a shot was fired. It was all just trying to figure shit out, and those games can sometimes be the absolute most fun, best games out there,
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because, like, on those games, I would say, like, one of the great things that I found on those types of games is that, when you're in combat, there are certain things that you just do. You punch, you shoot, you throw your sword, or you shoot an arrow, whatever it is you're doing. But in those other types of games, I mean, it just goes on forever. There's often mechanics where it's like self-generation, like this game, where it just could do anything, or it's really like kind of come up with it yourself, or something, or how you react to it could be in a billion different ways. So it's almost like the sky's the limit on games where the focus isn't necessarily on a hyper mechanical combat system, or just a mechanical combat system.
I tend to like striking a balance, and that's the hardest, because I like build systems. I like systems where you can be like, ooh, if I pair this perk with this perk, can I get a little out of this? I like that. But at the end of the day, you're not there for the stats. You're not there for the dice. Right. I was playing with a relatively new player a few sessions ago. The one group I'm in right now has just like all walks of life. We got the 40-year-olds all the way down. This dude's, I think he's like 20. I don't even think he's old enough to technically drink or whatever. But he was saying something about his stats, and I was like, listen, man, stats don't matter. They don't matter. And it's like, what do you mean? We have a whole character sheet of it. I was like, yeah, you have to have a character sheet, because if you didn't have a character sheet, none of this would have the weight of reality. Like, you have to have the weight of reality. That's the numbers. But you're not here for the numbers. You're here to pretend to be this cowboy, or pretend to be this vampire, or pretend to be this hunter, or whatever, you know. That's what you're here to do. The numbers are a means to an end, and that only mean is to make it feel real. You know what I mean? It's kind of a weird catch-22. But, like, with the systems, I tend to, like, always venture with, like, how can we make it super simple and easy to learn, quick to pick up, but very complex to overall master, so that, like, a player, like, okay, I always use the three of us, and I know Phil Billy wants to do this show at some point, so we got to have him on at some point, but you know, Phil, you and me, I feel like we're all very different players, but, like, you look at a player like Phil, he's a great role player, not insulting his role playing at all, but he really likes that mathematical level. He likes that, like, how do I make my character and maximize that ability? Well within the story or backstory of his character. I'm not calling him a power player at all, because I know he listens to this. He's be like, hey, no. Not calling him a power player at all. He's a very good role player. But, like, he likes that. He likes to take those stats and put those together. He likes to do builds. Honestly, that's what he does for my video game channel. That's why we all call him the Buildmaster General, is he used to make these builds for Borderlands, like, out of the traits and abilities in the game that would just, like, give you insane damage ratios, or basically break the game for you if you put them all in. So he likes that aspect, you know. Me, I tend to be more of the, I don't give a shit what the rules are, as long as the role-playing and the game mastering is good. That's what I want. I want to pretend to be somebody else for 2 hours. That's what I want. I want my escape. I want power fantasy. I want it to feel good while I do that. I don't want to be bogged down by a ton of rules. I don't want to have 4.5-hour combat sessions. You know what I mean? Like, that kind of stuff. So, like, I feel like you got to strike a balance there, right? You got to make the system easy, quick to pick up. You want to make it engaging for the build players, but at the same time, you want to make the role players happy too, and make it, you know what I mean? Like, you got to strike that balance, and that's where I tend to lay out, especially with when I'm writing a game. I try and make it, like, how can I make it as simple as possible while still making it really complicated? You know?
And which is no easy feat to do, by the way. No. I mean, like, they're like you said, catch-22. They're almost in direct opposition to each other. It's definitely a balancing act between the two. And I actually myself, I kind of find myself sort of falling in between the areas. I like modding. I really do quite a bit. But at the same time, for me, story does come first. Like, if my character is against something I know mechanically would be advantageous for him. Let's say he's a cleric, a religious type, and there's a demonic, like, sword. My cleric's not picking that thing up.
Right.
You know, I don't care how many points he's going to pick up on that thing. It's just not his character. But at the same time, I also like looking at my character and trying to figure out how I can, you know, strengthen him, or what direction he would go in, and why that would be good for him, why he would evolve. And I think character arc is super important, and one thing that is hard to get at a table sometimes. But that's, like, not just leveling up, but why did he take those perks or feats or skills, you know? And what has this changed about his character moving forward in the game? What kind of decisions is he going to make now that he's a gunslinger versus a sword master, or whatever the case may be?
Right. It's really hard. It's really hard to do that, especially nowadays, because I feel like there are a lot of games nowadays, when I look at the systems, and I'm not talking about indie games, I'm talking about the mainstream TTRPGs, that kind of skew into this kind of video game-like area. I think D&D kind of does that, and I think one of the biggest problems with that is you detach from the role-playing a little bit, because there's just so much into, like, perks and cantrips and abilities and stuff, and I like a good ability. I like a good perk. But at the same time, if you have too many of them, it feels like you're spamming a button. And suddenly, I'm not trying to pretend to be my character. I'm trying to get to the next level. And that almost is counterintuitive. I think there's a weird... Like, I think there's I'm not smart enough to make it, but I think that there is a definite, like, correlation and a parallel with today's TTRPG systems and video game logic and how you present them. And I think the downside of that is it puts a player in a certain mindset. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I do.
We're on a digression. We have not talked about this game nearly enough, but
you're absolutely right.
we're fully off the subject. But like, it's one of the things that, like, when I listen to actual plays, no offense to D&D guys out there if you're listening, because everybody knows I'm not a huge D&D person, but one of the reasons I
am a D&D person.
Yes, yeah, D&D is represented.
Yeah, D&D is represented. I do like D&D. I like 5e. I cut my teeth on a D&D.
We're not. Hey, I played D&D too. I'm not speaking from a place of ignorance, but one of the reasons
I know.
I tend to avoid listening to D&D actual plays is because I tend to watch the players disengage from their own characters a lot to do stuff that, like, oh, well, I'm going to get this ability that's like, do this. And you're like, wow, why would you be able to do that? And they start to, like, lose... they start to lose their character. I really like good role playing, I guess. I don't want you necessarily to be you. I want you to be pretending to be somebody else. Like, that's the point. And like you look at, like, shout out to my favorite actual play podcast, which is Two Monsters Rolling Dice, hands down. They're role playing the entire time, right? Like, it's constant role playing. It's constant character driven stuff. The system is just something that enhances that and allows you to get to it faster, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something that, like, I fear that, like, larger systems have tended to, like, gravitate towards that video game. And it's great in video games, but I'm not trying to pretend to be somebody else in a video game, you know?
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and you know, like I mean, I do like D&D. One thing I will say though, I don't disagree with you on anything you've said whatsoever. What I would say, like, one thing I will consistently say about D&D is that it's often touted as the greatest role-playing game ever. It's not. Yeah. There's no my personal philosophy is there's no such thing as the greatest role-playing game ever. It's up to you as an individual what your play style is, and it might be the greatest game for some people, but not the greatest game for others.
Yeah.
And people just have different tastes. There's the Greeks had that saying. There's no accounting for taste.
Yeah.
You can't bank on that.
Well, and like TTRPGs is such an interesting medium because really it's a system and a world, right? Like that's like, but at its core, it's a system for pretend. It's a system for playing pretend. That's what it is. Right. That's what they all are, and like that's awesome. But like that's so much harder to say this is the greatest game.
Yeah.
Because like even with like video games or movies, you could potentially make an argument for the greatest video game or the greatest movie because it's much more a medium that's just giving you information. Even with video games, which is something where you interact, which is great. That's something I always say on my video game show. Like, it's one of the only it's the only art form where you get to interact with the art itself as it's telling you the story. Like, you get to decide things in it. TTRPGs is completely unique in its own way because TTRPGs is literally a series of numbers to aid you in playing pretend. Definitely there's lore in there too. I'm not saying there isn't, but overall, that's what you're doing. And that is going to be a different thing for every person who plays it. Like, there's no way you could say John and Steve are going to be as into the same system for playing pretend as Becky and Kate over here, or Eduardo or Leonardo. I don't know where I'm pulling these names, but like, you see what I'm saying? Like, it could be anything. So unique. you know?
Yeah, it is. But let's talk about
The game.
Or Against the Darkness.
We're only 25
I'm
minutes
excited
in.
about this game.
It is. It's a good game.
So
So you create your character, you create your party, you pick 4 characters. Every character has a trait. It has got a starting equipment. It's got starting wealth, which is your gold piece, and then the life points, which are how much health you have, and that goes up as you level as well. And then basically, excuse me, sorry. And then basically, after you pick the 4, and you pick their special abilities, then you head into the dungeon and start. Well, I'm sorry. Then you decide to buy equipment, which is interesting because you have to buy your starting weapons, you have to buy all your starting equipment, so that can be very tricky. And then once you get those starting equipment, and the equipment's simple. I think it's like 12, 15 selections, very simple equipment. It's one thing. I know a lot of you out there are probably thinking, wow, running an entire dungeon for yourself is going to be a lot of number scores and keeping track of things. There's plenty of that. But it's not as bad as you think it is. You've got your characters on your sheet, and then the combat is insanely easy and quick. It's like a D6, you add your level, and then that's how many bad guys you kill, depending on whether you beat their level or not. So like if you're fighting goblins and they're level 3, every 3 is another goblin you kill. So like if you roll a 6, you kill 2 goblins for that character, you know? And then they do wounds, they attack you basically on their turn based on your armor class. And it's very quick, it's very easy. So you're only keeping track of your own life points. There are certain boss or big elite baddies that you can come up with that have their own life points, but there's never like 3 or 4 of them in a room. You know what I mean? It's always like the 4 of you are taking one on, which is really cool. I also very much love that there is a difference between crushing and slashing weapons. If you'll notice, anybody who's watched Astral Drive and Wizard, this is where I got the blunt slash. I kind of came to the realization that every weapon either is blunt or cut. It either cuts or smashes. Like every weapon, when you really think about it. Even a projectile weapon, it either cuts or it smashes. That's it. I mean, so like this game has that, and I just love that. Like that's where that idea came from. Like I just read that in this, and I was like, holy shit! Every weapon crushes or slashes. Every weapon. But like I said, you then use D6. It's all D6 to generate the rooms from place to place, and they have like crudely drawn out rooms. And they have them drawn on graphs so you can count them out on your graph paper. So like if it's a corridor, you'll see the squares inside and be able to say, okay, that's 6 squares long and 2 squares wide. And then you can see where the doors are on each of the squares that has doors and stuff like that. And then you roll for what's in it, whether it be random treasure, random events, random monsters, random quests. You deal with whatever that is. And then you pick another way to go. And you head that way, you randomly roll it, all the way till you get to a final boss, which is a big bad baddie that you have to slay. Then, to top it all off, to make it even more interesting, once you defeat the final boss, it's not just like, good job, and it's over. You have to escape. You have to pocket all the stuff that you can pocket. And then you have to get out. And as you're getting out, like every room you go into on the way back, you roll a d6. And if you roll a 1, you get a random encounter. So you have to like fight your way out of the dungeon after that. And that's literally the game, guys. And then there's just all sorts of stuff from events. There's special features. You can find blessed temples or fountains. There's special events where you can find the wandering monsters. You can find random ladies that'll talk to you. You can meet wandering alchemists. All of these are coming off the things. I'm scrolling through it on a PDF next to it. You can find random treasure, random magic items, vermin, monsters, minions, bosses. It's all good. It's all in there.
Those are all just randomly generated, right?
Yeah. It's randomly generated. And with the amount of like stuff that goes into it, you'll meet the same things. You'll never meet them in the same order. And because of that, you can always generate a story based off of it. You know what I mean? It obviously harkens back to like some of the other solo stuff we've talked about, like T-Shop, where like you could very easily use this to generate a story for yourself. You know, it's just a much more in-depth system.
Yeah. Reading through it, I haven't played it yet. I'm definitely excited to jump into it. Reading through it, there's a lot of stuff that I really liked about the mechanics also. I love there's a number of things. You hit pretty much all of the big points on the mechanics. One thing I liked a lot was how easy it was to just pick this thing up. Like, I could just almost speed read through it. It was so intuitive and clean. I didn't have to go back and reread anything. I didn't get lost in semantics. I didn't get confused anywhere. It just made sense.
Yeah, it just goes. It just flows.
Yeah. And then once you get through the chunk of like and I say chunk, but I mean like it's a decently sized a playbook that's easy to get through.
Yeah.
But also a good portion of it is those random tables.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to go and read all the random tables before you start.
I would advise you don't. It's much more fun if you don't. Trust me. When I played the first time, so the first game I ever played of it, I played by myself without Stella once somebody had loaned it to me. And I just played through it as I read it. So like I went to character creation, I picked 4 characters. I went to... There's another thing too, when I write games, I try and write them like this game is put together. Because this game is literally like... So I try and write it like, if you were playing it, like as you read it, would it work? You know what I mean? Or would you have to jump around a lot? With this, you could literally just play it as you read it. There's very little jumping around. Every once in a while, you're going to hit something where you're like, what the fuck is that? And then you're going to have to find it later on. But overall, like, oh, I'm at character creation. I make some characters. Okay, time to generate. Okay, start generating. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to, like, you don't even have to read the whole book. I would actually advise you don't. I would say just start playing it as you read it, especially with the random stuff. Because it's so much more fun to, like, randomly roll and then see, ooh, special event. What the hell is that? And then get to read it, you know, completely fresh while you're in it. It kind of gives you that feeling of like, oh, wow, I stumbled upon this thing. It's amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly what I was kind of getting out of it myself, was that I would basically, I read through it, and then I sat down. When I play it, I'm going to just sit down and basically read through it and go exactly like you described, step by step. And it is really intuitive. And that's one of my favorite things when I find that in a game, is if they have that intuitive thing that anybody can just pick up. That's one of my, it's like a hidden gem. You know, you find that game, and it's really just fantastic.
I've always wanted to play a co-opetition of this, where, and I've never been able to do this, but I find somebody else, we get a big sheet of graph paper, right? And then we each make our own party and enter from different places, and then just slowly randomly draw on the graph paper till we run into each other. And then potentially have to fight each other. You know what I mean? Like, I think that would be so much fun. I've always wanted to do that with this.
We're gonna end up doing that on the show, aren't we?
Maybe. I don't know how we do the graph paper part is the thing. But
yeah, that would be tricky.
Maybe.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Doesn't it though? Doesn't it though? And it's like a race to find the final boss. And if you find the final boss before the other team and get out, you just win. Or if you find the other team, you can kill them. Or if they get it and they're trying to get out, you could try and get to them. Like, that'd be so much fun. It'd be so much fun to do that.
Can you imagine what it'd be like if you got to the final boss, your party just got hammered, and you're trying to make its way out, and then all of a sudden the other team,
the other team
intercepts.
Hi, we'll be taking your gold now. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be absolutely great. I think that, and this game, like I said, it's just such a simple concept. It's so easy to add stuff to it. It would be so easy to make those rooms on a spaceship. It'd be so easy to take that random chart and just like, okay, well, instead of rats, it's space goblins, or instead of this, it's a power supply, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, there's so many things you could do with this. You could do this as an archaeology game, like an Indiana Jones game, if you wanted to. I think that, and you just change the classes and races to professions. I think that this is just a really cool base idea all the way around. But we have to complain about it a little bit. Like that's also our job. We have to do nitpicks.
That's true.
I think we've gone through everything this system is, unless there's anything else you want to add before we get to it. Just
one more thing that I liked about it was I loved how the art and the classic design. It reminded me of just old school classic TTRPGs from the 80s. And I have a soft spot for that.
I'm gonna actually do something real quick for everybody out there, because I rarely get to do this. I'm gonna shrink my head for a second, everybody, and then I'm gonna add a window so you can see some of the art in this game. Let's just do a window capture. Okay. Yes. All right, and then that's over Wizard's face, which we didn't want. So yeah, we'll shrink that down. So you guys can see some of the art as I scroll through it. So these are the rooms that you can see. Now, Wizard's not going to be able to see these, unfortunately, because of the way we record, but you can see some of the art. He can look at his own. So you can see these are all the rooms that you would pick from. Then you can see some of the really classic art that I'm scrolling through here. I really love that picture of the lady sorceress with the goblins behind her. I think that's phenomenal. And just this is a very classic D&D art, right?
Yeah.
Here's some of the classes.
Old school, TSR all the way.
Yes, like OG Dungeons and Dragons, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, even to the point where like that's how OG Dungeons and Dragons were. Like races were their own classes. There were no classes versus races. It was, warrior, cleric, rogue, and then you had a bunch of like you had elf, dwarf, halfling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, so just so everybody could see some of the classic style art on it and take a look at it. I think some of this art is really cool. Very classic, old school stuff. So there you guys go. You get to see some of the pictures, and I'm glad you brought that up because it's one of the things that we usually forget to do it on this channel, on the show. Actually, we always talk about the systems. We're very into the systems. We never really talk about the presentation, and the presentation for this to be an indie game is really good.
Yeah, and I think presentation. It may not be the game, but I do think it's important.
It's very important. Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I think there was one YouTuber I even saw that when he was first getting into YouTube into TTRPGs, he had all he had was the books, and he didn't have anybody to play with for the longest time, and all he would do is just look at the pictures and there's something extra that just sucks you into this world by these images that you have here, and the images in this book just bring me back to being a kid and loving fantasy when I was a child.
Yeah, I completely concur with that. I'm gonna, for everybody out there, I'm gonna turn this off now and make my head big again. Sorry for that, but one of the things that that I'll say, and I'm sure we're eventually going to do a D&T episode, but the one thing that they 100% did right was the Monstrous Manual. I could read the Monstrous Manual any day. There would be days where I'm going to pick a page in the Monstrous Manual and read it just because it was just cool. And the art, so good. Every monster had a picture so you could see what it looked like. The Monstrous Manual is absolutely... Like, while I don't like D&D, we've been on that subject. I've said that. But the Monstrous Manual from AD&D, and probably the newer ones are just as good, but was absolutely an accomplishment. Like, I would use the Monstrous Manual in other games just to come up with monster ideas, because there's just so many in there.
Yeah.
And they give so much more than just their stats. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I love the Monstrous Manual, and that's what it reminded me of. Is just that kind of art. You know what I mean? Like that.
Oh, for sure.
That presentation was so good. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I'm glad you brought that up before we got to the extreme nitpickiness.
Yes. So let's start digging into it.
Sure.
What were your first nitpicks? What were the things that you felt like maybe you could have seen improve your experience with this game?
Okay, so there's two things that I think. One, they're both things that would be hard to change, and I understand why they did them in the way they did them. But at the same time, they make it difficult in the moment, and I wish they would change, but I understand if they never do. Does that make sense? It's a long-winded disclaimer, but I'm a walking disclaimer, so everybody's got to get used to that. The first and foremost, the biggest thing that always irritated me was the way you use the dice to generate the rooms. Was very hard for me to understand at first. Because, so, for everybody out there, you would roll... you roll a d6 to determine which entrance you have. And then you roll, like, whether or not it's a corridor... No, wait. I can't remember. Hold on. Let me go. Entrance rooms. I don't want that. Entrance room. I can't remember. But, like, you would roll 2d6s. One dice, like, you'd use d6s like percentile dice for a lot of it.
Mm.
And that was hard for me to wrap my head around so much. So, like room 1-1 is you rolled a 1 and a 1 together. You know what I mean? Like, or something like that. And that was really hard for me to, like, wrap my head around. You know, the 1 1 1 1 2 1 1 to 1 6. Like, there was 11 to 16. Then there was 21 to 26. Then there was 30. You see what I'm saying? And it was very hard to wrap my head around. And when I was first playing, it was the only thing that, like, I had to reread it like 3 times because I'm like, wait, why? How would you ever get a 23 on 2d6? I don't understand what's happening here.
Yeah.
You know, it was it just if you're a long time game player, it's not the way anybody has ever used dice before, in my opinion. So it was, I don't know,
and
it was tricky.
I can definitely see what you mean. It was a little convoluted there, and it's pretty. When you read through it, it's pretty obvious as to why they did it.
Yeah.
The only set of dice you need is d6.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to bring in a percentile die.
Yeah.
Or do any other version of that would have made it a little bit more. That would have made it simpler.
Well, and that's exactly why I disclaimered it, because I could see why they did it, because they didn't want different dice, but at the same time, it was like, chihuahua.
Yeah.
Like, this is hard to wrap my head around, I guess, you know?
Yeah. I can definitely see that. I can even think of a couple of different ways that maybe I would have done it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Like, rolling a d6 to determine which 6, not rooms you rolled on, but which 6 room tables you chose first.
Right.
And then from there, that's 6 more tables of 6, and maybe you just kind of build from there.
Like, it could be the same way. It just the way they organized it was not the most conducive with understanding it right off the bat. So, like, I feel like that was a little bit lost. My other thing is kind of the characters. Number one, I don't like the idea of races being their own characters. I never have. I never liked that about original Dungeons and Dragons either. Like, you just play a halfling. Like every halfling's the same. Every dwarf's the same. Every elf's the same. I don't like that. I would much rather have a ton of classes and then a ton of races. And they did this to have parity with that OG D&D feel. And I
Yeah.
get that, but at the same time, like, I want to play a halfling who's a cleric, or I want to play a dwarf who's a cleric, you know? You really can't do that in this game. There's no way to do that without any sort of home brewing. That, and I would love a little bit more meat on the traits abilities bone. I understand they want to keep it simple, but there is, like, a level of, like, you have one thing you do with this character, and that is it. And the reason is you're monitoring 4 characters. I understand that, but at the same time, when your barbarian levels up, all they get is an extra health point. Like that's
Yeah.
really it. Whereas like there's no real build system for your characters at all. There, there's very little reward for the success other than money to get more equipment, but you only have 15 pieces of equipment in the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like
No.
there's magic items that you can find in the dungeon, which is nice, but like overall, you see what I'm saying? Like there's only so much you can do with that. Whereas I would much rather have a little bit more of a build system, a little bit more meat on the character creation, bones, so that I could get a little bit more attached to my characters. I think when you're playing alone, you're not role playing. So there's no real way to like there's obviously story writing that you can do, but there's no real way to get in the moment attached to your characters other than the numbers. I think giving a little bit more numbers to your characters would have actually helped a little bit on that. I think one of the reasons I didn't play it by myself more than once was because of the fact that, like, okay, they all went up by 1 health point, like, yippee skippy, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there becomes very little reason for your characters to do what they do, you know?
Yeah.
Especially if they get out of that dungeon with, like, 50 gold pieces. Like, okay, I got everything I want. I'm good. I'm retired, you know?
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see that. There's the lack of modding, and yeah, the lack of like that kind of goes a little bit into my nitpick also is like you were just saying, like, okay, I got 50 gold pieces, now I'm gonna go and retire. It really the one thing about this game, it doesn't give me like a lot of context on, like, and maybe I missed it a little bit. I haven't played it yet. Maybe you could correct me on this. Um, Outside of the dungeon,
Yeah.
like this game can continue from dungeon to dungeon. It is set up so
Yes.
you can technically continue on.
Yeah.
But when you leave a dungeon and it has mechanics for you actually wanting to escape a dungeon because one of your characters got turned to stone or somebody got seriously hurt, where do you go?
Yeah. Yeah. There's
You just
no...
go and find a healer, but there's nothing out there. There's no
Right.
part of the game that gives you that.
There is no exterior game. It's just the dungeon and the 4 characters in the dungeon, which I would understand it being simplified. Like, it's all about the dungeon, but still there should be something outside, some sort of random roll, some sort of procedural generation. Like, maybe the characters get sick, maybe they, you know what I mean? Something.
Yeah.
I would also love some sort of way to build an overarching storyline for my characters. You know, my daughter
Yeah.
made me realize it when she was in there kind of like playing around with princesses and stuff. I would love it if once you got out of the dungeon, there was like another table that kind of decided how you were connected to this one and how you were connected to the next one. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like some sort of like way for like a campaign to be built out of these instead of just, hey, we're doing dungeons because we want money, which is a good reason, but at the same time, I want a little bit more to it. I'd also love it if something kind of like built out of it. You know what I mean? Like maybe that's
Yeah.
the first reason they go in. But the second reason is once they're in there, they realize that the Eye of Antioch has fallen into this powerful necromancer's hands. They got to go get that, you know. Like
Yeah.
I'd love some threads, even in the events table or something, that could be long reaching, further reaching than the dungeon. It's very made for just the dungeon. Like that's it. I would love them to make some threads that like took us to more dungeons in the future. That give me more reason to play more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they don't really give you any reason to play past that first dungeon other than you want to play another dungeon, and like at that point, okay, but I'm gonna get bored of it eventually. They don't give you that like next reason.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And that was kind of my biggest nitpick personally on that. And I will say, maybe the game isn't necessarily designed for that. So,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, these are we're calling these nitpicks for a
Yes.
reason.
Yeah. It's still a great game. It's still a great
Yeah.
game. I mean, in our
And
corrections, though, in our defense, our corrections are like what, like an extra 10 pages tops, So
yeah,
like, in
yeah.
fairness, it's a relatively easy ad, but
I
that
mean,
is
I would
definitely
even like want to homebrew my own like exterior world random generator
Yep.
table,
Yep.
just for the fun of it, and slice it together there.
Yeah.
And because I kind of am craving that little aspect of it for
Yep.
this game, because
Yeah.
so much of this game is so much fun, but there's not context.
Right.
Right. And I miss that context a bit.
Well,
I will
and
say, like, I would hands down say that this is almost a quintessential dungeon scroll
yeah.
game. If anybody was like, well, what is that? I'd point them to this game.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
If
you want to know what a dungeon crawl is, this is the game to find out, without a doubt. I do want to say, though, at the end of the day, I'm a role-playing player. I'm a heavy role-play player. This doesn't have any of that. That was the one downside to it. There's no, even in the story, there's no, like, you're just in there, and then you're out of there, and there's no, there's nothing in between to, like, tie it together. So that is my biggest downside. But yeah, I think if you're a person out there, if there's somebody out there who's like, well, what's a dungeon crawl? Go play 4 Against the Darkness. That's a dungeon crawl. In period, it is exactly what it is. Like, and if you like that part of D&D, play this game. You'll enjoy this game.
Oh yeah,
like 100%.
And if you don't like that part of D&D, play this game because it's different enough.
Yeah, that's true.
To give you to sort of scratch to give you something different, but it also gives you what you like about that part. If you're the type that likes dungeon crawls, it's really unique and it's kind of clever in that way. It's a fun game. I'm looking forward so much to sitting down this weekend, this afternoon, spending like a bit of time to go through it. And one thing on this mechanic that I thought was real smart. It was just one line in there. There's a couple of different ways to get to the boss to get to the final room. One of them was you set a time limit.
Yep. Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, that is clever because cool. I don't always have time to devote consecutive hours to every game I want to play, but I can get this game in like an hour, 1 hour. Oh, that's cool.
Well, when I played with my daughter, I had one campaign that took one dungeon that was like a whole page. It was just this huge scrawling page. I was running out of like walls, and it took like 2-3 hours to get through. Then we had another one that was 5 rooms. 5 rooms. We ran into the final boss, and that was that. So it was. It's really cool. It's really cool in that way that you could definitely put a time limit on it and just be like 45 minutes, final boss will appear, It's very easy to play it that way. But I think we're all done with this. I think all that's left is for you to choose our next topic.
Okay. Next topic, next game. I actually have one I've been looking at for quite some time.
Okay.
I just purchased it today, so this is I'm going to be going through it, giving it a real deep dive read, and I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts on it too. It's a solo TTRPG game. Obviously, we like those.
Yes, we do.
1,000 Years a Vampire.
Oh, that sounds fun.
I'm really stoked about this one. I've been hearing so much about it. and I think it's going to be right up our alley.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's got that. I mean, we're talking about role play,
Mm-hmm.
emotional. Like the last tea shop was a very emotional, role play heavy solo
Yeah.
TTRPG. That's my understanding that's what this game is. Haven't read it yet. I've been had my eye on it. It's been in my shopping cart for freaking ever, and I'm just so excited about the chance to get down and read it and go over that and get your thoughts on it too.
That is awesome. I do want to say we are going to start running out of systems at some point. I think that we should unleash the safety on our topics and just start being allowed to pick topics in gaming too if we wanted to. How do you feel
Yeah,
about that?
I think that's a fantastic
Okay.
idea. Actually, I was gonna bring that up to you
I think that
outside the
works
show
too
at some point.
for having guests on.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would love to have guests. This community is so easy to talk to. I've made a lot of
They're a lot of
friends
fun.
out there in TTRPG, the world, who are content creators who are making games. I would love to have interviews on their creative process on here. And I would love to, have a show where we're just, sit down, you and I, and talk about a mechanic that's popular out there,
Yes.
a
Yes.
trend that is popular, outside of mechanics, just a popular theme that's expressed in a lot
Yeah.
of these games or something.
My favorite parts of
And
these shows are when we get into the core of what being a role playing game player is.
yeah,
Like I love that. That's my favorite part of the parts of these shows is when we get down to like the like what it means to us, what it is, how it works in its core. I love talking about that. Like almost the philosophy of gaming
yeah,
is something that I just love. I've been a gamer in all forms that I could possibly be a gamer in for 41 years of life. So I just love talking about that. So I'm very excited about that. But next, in 2 weeks, we will do 1,000
Thousand Years
Years
of
of
Vampire.
Vampire. I'm excited. I'm excited. All right. Well, if you want to sign us off, man, we're all done.
Okay, well, for everybody watching, everybody who's also listening, this has been the Wizards Respite Sanctorum. We're doing this bi-weekly, so every other week, drops on Friday. And this is it. We just nerd out solid about TTRPGs,
Yes.
do a deep dive, go into topics that, you know, I mean, we all do. We're
Mm-hmm.
we're gaming nerds, but we get to really talk about it, and hopefully everybody out there likes it. Um, Zach, do you have anything you want to plug before we say goodnight?
Oh God, I can't be a YouTuber anymore. I forgot to do plugs. I gotta smash that like. No. Yeah, you can check me out on Old Man Gaming on YouTube. We do both video games and TTRPGs, obviously. So we do actual plays for the Astral Drive. Wizard is involved in, I think, all of them at this particular moment. We also do a TMNT and other Strangeless actual play, which is one of my favorite things to do in a month period. And then we also do all of Wizard's wonderful video content. You should check out Wizard. I'm gonna plug Wizard. You should check out him. I'm sure he's gonna plug himself, but check out his fucking thing. It's great. And then we also do video gaming on my channel as well. Reviews, podcasts, let's plays, stuff like that. And then if you want to buy the games that I create, check out Axiom Games LLC. Right now we have 2 games on Drive Through Games, and we are looking to release a new one on itch.io sometime in the near future called Single Mod, which is going to be a base system for all of your play needs from here on out. A 30-page, simple but complicated system. So check those out.
Awesome, yeah, and thank you for that shout out to the Wizards Respite. Yeah, that's gonna be my plug for the night. It's the wizardsrespite.com. Basically, I just deep dive into all things TTRPG. If you like what we're doing here, that's basically more of what I do on the website. All of these shows are also going to be on the Wizards Respite, so you'll be able to see everything collected that we're doing together, and that Zach's doing. We also have some campaign report style
Yes.
shows up there as well. So more tabletop role playing game nerdness that you can sink your teeth in.
Yeah, anything you watch that comes out on my channel, please go to wizardrespite.com and watch it there. We both get to view that way.
Yeah.
So it's nice.
Synergy.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, if we're streaming something, by all means, come to my channel to interact with us. But if you're watching it afterwards or you're watching it a pre-recorded thing, please just watch it on wizardsrespite.com. We both get reviews that way. He needed a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I needed to do more TTRPG stuff. That's how this happened. It's the best part of having a YouTube channel is all the weird international connections that I have made in the last 5 years of my life. It's crazy. But this is one of my favorites. So
been a lot of fun, and yeah, I'm very glad that Zach came in and was like, "Hey, I got this YouTube channel," because I don't know how to do the YouTube channel.
I was so afraid that you would think I was trying to horn in on your website when I made the pitch to be like, "Hey, why don't you do all your video content through me and I'll do all the editing and stuff?" I was so afraid he's gonna be like, he's thinking I'm trying to ride his coattails or something. I'm so glad
I really needed I needed that help on the video stuff. I didn't even know where to start, and I still want to do short form videos on various platforms, TikTok and all of that stuff, but
it's hard.
I like sticking to the keyboard, to be honest with you. But doing this with you takes so much pressure off me.
That helps
so much.
I produce at least a day worth of content every week for YouTube. So every week we have at least one piece of content going on up every day. We average 7 pieces of content per week. True. And it is not easy, man. And anybody out there who's like, he does all that, this is good? I'm like, no, it's not good. This is definitely quantity over quality. Sometimes Wizard will be like, hey, do you think we can make that better? I'll be like, I don't know how to do that. I'll try. I just try and get them out the door.
I can't even imagine, man. I can't even. So yeah. So that's our show. That's what we're doing.